Well, hello, everybody. Welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast. My name is James Dixon, and as always, I wish you a genuine good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you join today's podcast from. And on today's podcast, a topic that I was just saying to our guest off air before we hit record today, I shuddered when I looked at it. It frightened me, it intrigued me, it opened up all sorts of thoughts as to what we were going to talk about today, which is why, as usual, I've prepared absolutely Zippo and we'll just dive into the conversation. Alecia May is our guest today. Alecia is a certified event strategist and coach, host of the Six Figure Event podcast, and is the founder of Eventistry by Alecia, and joins us today. Alecia, welcome to the Event Industry News podcast.
Hello, James. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome along here. And as I said at the top there, shuddered, intrigued, all sorts of emotions when I thought 87, surely you can't have possibly used 87 virtual event platforms and learned something from all of them. Tell us, there's loads to get into today, but tell us how on earth you've reached that figure.
Yeah, so I started using platforms before platforms were a thing a year and a half ago. So virtual event technology, using apps at events. So I started about 2.5, 3 years ago using these types of, even further than that, apps. And so I just started making a little Excel sheet with all of the apps, and every client had a different platform they wanted to use. And then the pandemic hit, and then everybody wanted to use, again, a different platform. So here we are with my Excel spreadsheet, 87 columns later, with just different apps and different technologies I've used over the past, let's say, 3.5 years, which is a ridiculous number, right, James?
It is. It's a huge number because I'm absolutely certain that most people listening to this will have used multiple platforms, especially in the last 12 months. I joked that when Zoom boomed last year, I'd been using Zoom for 5 years, and suddenly everybody's raving about it. But to reach that sort of figure, I'm guessing that represents quite a steep learning curve to have achieved that figure in a relatively short space of time. But also that you've obviously working with a lot of different clients with a lot of different requirements, a lot of different needs, criteria to fulfill, which is why you've ended up with this list. Let's go back in time pre-pandemic, first of all, before there was the pressure on us to use these platforms, and tell us a little bit about your story in using some of these to deliver events for clients on a virtual capacity.
Absolutely. And one of my biggest clientele are event tech or technology type of conferences. So, women in tech, women in cloud. And so we were always, because we were at the forefront of technology and we were at the forefront of, let's use the next best thing, we were able to look at these different platforms and different apps and things like that, and really hone in on those because they were needed and required based on the industry we were in. So, utilizing these platforms and apps, I loved them because nobody was using them except for event technology conferences. And so, I splashed around in a few Event Mobi, just a few different other ones as well. And it was always such a great tool to have because people could just open their phone and say, hey, here's the agenda, here's what's happening next, let's head on over, let's maybe do some matchmaking, networking. And it was just an easy tool, right? And that's, again, a live format with an app to assist. When you have those big conferences like Collision and things like that, right, those apps are really helpful because of floor plans and expos. So, that's how I started kind of digging into the app world, which, again, I really love. I love technology. I love apps. I geek out. And then the pandemic hit, James, and it's like everybody's using apps. And like you said, I've been using Zoom for 8 years. So I've always been a remote event planner, which may seem a little interesting because most people just started a year and a half ago, whereas I've had remote clients for the past 8 years.
It's 8 years. When I think back to what we were all doing 8 years ago, there was still a major argument going on in most of the live events industry as to whether or not we should even stream live content out of our live event for fear of not having as many people turn up at it. it's amazing to see that conversation has been tossed wildly out the window in the last 18 months. And it's not even a thing or a consideration anymore. And I think back to the people who were saying to me, look, people worrying about this whole streaming thing, they're really worried over nothing. They're not seeing the bigger picture here. So it fascinates me that people were certainly forced to see the bigger picture fairly swiftly.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I actually like that they were forced to see the bigger picture because at the end of the day, when we were streaming and we were doing virtual events before virtual events were cool,
Mm.
right? We were streaming and we were doing, content based. And for a lot of coaching entrepreneur clients we have, we were capturing that content and then utilizing it on a online platform. So like a membership site or something similar, course, etc. So I'm actually kind of glad. I don't, maybe I shouldn't say that out loud, but that people are forced now to use the technology because
Mm.
I'm a big fan.
And going back to this figure of having used 87 of the platforms, it would be impossible to sort of go through every single one today and just get a little bit something. But there must be some broader and more generic lessons that you have learned and then been able to maybe pass on,
Oh
I
yes.
suppose, good advice and the best practice for people. What are some of the sort of the key takeaways that you've taken from these 87 platforms?
Not, it's funny because I had a client yesterday who did a demo. I just have to preface this with this little story. She did a demo with a platform and they sold her. She was like, "This is the best platform. I love this. I love the look." But I have used that platform 10, 13 times, and every single one of those times it had failed miserably on the production/technical side.
Right.
So, one of the biggest lessons is that yes, they can package it up in a shiny box and in a demo format or even just a simple video on their website. But at the end of the day, if you haven't used it before, you just don't know. And if you haven't used it multiple times, you just don't know. The first time could be great, the second time could be terrible. So, lessons learned, I think the biggest takeaway is that every platform has different features. They all essentially function the same, right? They all deliver that virtual experience that they want, but every single platform has maybe a different nuance or has a different feature or benefit, or maybe the customer service is a little bit better. So, at the end of the day, I would say for someone who's looking for a platform, experience it. Try to hop onto an event to see how that event has transpired on that platform. Because again, you don't know what you don't know. Some platforms, 100% success every single time I've used them. I've used, for instance, Feedloop like 35 times, and
Mm.
I like Feedloop because it's easy. You can customize it, and again, the technical support slash what the key benefits and features are have always been pretty upstanding, right? I've never
Mm.
had a technical oops on that platform, whereas other ones, they kind of grade low comparison to some of the other ones I've used. So none of them are perfect, right,
Sure.
Jane? Like none
Sure.
of them are perfect. Let's just be honest here. As an event professional, anyone who's listening, not one is going to I'm going to say, wow, this is the best platform I've ever used in my whole life. It's just not happening. So take it with a grain of salt. Know that they're not perfect, and that it is, they've been developed over the last year and a half based on what event professionals, clients, et cetera, the general public have been wanting. And again, it's not a real life in person, so make it the best you can and be okay with that,
Sure.
because this is what the delivery is. So, few little tidbits in there, but biggest takeaway, it's, they're not going to be perfect, and you're not going to maybe get everything you always wanted and dreamed because one platform has something and the other platform doesn't, and vice
Mm.
versa.
And I guess that, well, there are parallels there, certainly in comparisons with in-person live events, in that you're never going to find the perfect venue. You're
Correct.
never going to have the perfect lineup of conference speakers. You're never going to have every exhibitor that you want exhibiting at your exhibition. You're not going to have every band that you want on the bill at your festival, So there are always compromises in events, whether they're live or virtual. I suppose the point I'd like to make on and maybe ask for your opinion on is that one thing that we don't have the luxury of with in-person events necessarily is full rehearsals or being able to set up that conference or exhibition in advance and see how it runs in order to test it, which we do with some of these virtual event platforms. Do you think there's not enough of that happens at the moment with organizers, where they're actually willing to put some time aside and test it properly and see if it functions as it should do?
I mean, some yes, I think that there's some clients, maybe some event professionals that have, we should be testing, we should be doing rehearsals, and not just one, multiple and multiple and multiple. One client, we do 4 rehearsals because at the end of the day, we want to make sure, especially if it's a new platform, I want to test the functionality and everything else, every single tidbit, let's test that to the fullest extent. Because if the production goes well 4 times, right, the 5th time, hopefully, right, let's be honest, technology doesn't always work in our favor. So absolutely 100%, James, you should be testing the platform. You should be testing the technology. You not just once, right? You should be
Yeah.
doing this multiple times over the course of, let's say, 2 weeks. One thing I found is that we don't have all the content, or the content's coming in after, the last possible deadline, and everybody's kind of scrambling, because speakers haven't submitted their bios and portfolio. You can still do a rehearsal. You can still test the technology. You can still get on whatever StreamYard, Restream, whatever the case, Zoom, Teams.
Mhm.
I mean, you can go on and on and on. But at the end of the day, you can still be able to be 100% prepared in a virtual setting, and look at, what are the challenges that come up?
Mm.
What are the, technical issues, and then actually diffuse them and then do it all over again. So I'm a big believer in doing, like I said, 4, 5, 6 times sometimes.
Absolutely. And finding workarounds, because you may have selected a platform, you realize it can't do something that you wanted it to do, or you want to do something that's not quite compatible with the platform. And the process, in my experience over the last 12 months, is you're continually finding workarounds. Right. We can't quite get it to do that. So what's the workaround? How can we get it? You know, use the word hack loosely,
Yes,
but
yes.
that's what we're doing. That's what I found people doing constantly, is how to hack something to make it work for them.
Oh, absolutely, and that's a great word. I'm gonna take that word, James. But, one of our clients, she wanted to restream it to 5 different platforms. Well, the platform didn't work, so we did a little hack where we, streamed on StreamYard, then to Vimeo
Mhm.
live, took that embed code, and then put it into the platform, which,
Great. Yeah.
it worked. It was a hack,
Yeah, yeah. I've done that with
right?
YouTube as well, out of StreamYard. Because a lot of the sort of off the shelf website platforms now work really well with YouTube embed links. They've got that functionality built into them anyway. You can drop a link into, the GoDaddy or Wix or anything like that, and it works straight away. And then boom, you've got a live stream on your website page.
Exactly, exactly, and that's a great idea to understand that there can be a workaround, if you have the right person that can guide you to that workaround, or to, here's how we've done it 87 other times.
Yeah. Um, I know that we sort of use the term platform, that could suggest that it's all encompassing, and anybody who's run a virtual event in the last 12 months, or prior to that as well, knows that often you've got multiple platforms integrating with each other. You've got tech stacks being
Your
built
tech
with,
stack.
different things going off. What are your experiences of working with multiple platforms? Integration, how have you found the sort of spectrum to be between good and bad, and what integrates well and what doesn't?
I love tech stacks. I think, tech stacks are quite common, especially in the coaching entrepreneur space, where the virtual summit, that's the more, dubbed term instead of the conference or live, virtual event,
Mm.
where it's all pre-recorded, right? It's just a pre-recorded summit. There's nothing quote unquote live. So I love those tech stacks where you can integrate like Zoom, Kajabi, Zapier to your mailing list, and this and that. And so I love that, because then it's just all automated. And again, you do your rehearsals, do your do your test
Mm.
runs. But at the end of the day, those ones seem to be almost even more seamless, because we don't have the live component, and we've already tested it. It's, or all speakers have been on video, and in my world, it's always been such a 95%, let's say, success rate in the when the virtual summit actually happens or transpires. So tech stacks for me, just make sure that when you're hiring somebody or when you're doing it yourself. Again, rehearsals, testing, 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 or hire someone that knows how to do those tech stacks and what works well together. Listen, there's so many apps and technologies that I can't even keep up anymore. I mean, 87 is a lot, but every time there's a new client,
Yeah,
right? It's like, oh, there's a new platform, there's a new
yeah.
whatever.
Realistically, the 87, it is a big figure, and for one agency or one organization to have used all of those and have that experience is a big figure. But the reality is, it's scratching the surface of
Oh,
what is out there. And the sort of the aside, I suppose, to what we were just talking about there about tech stacks is, my experience also tells me that a lot of the platforms out there and a lot of the providers, they know what works well with their platform. So if
oh
you've
yeah,
chosen platform A and you want another platform to do something else, ask that provider rather than going shopping around. Ask what works well with their platform, what integrates, what have they seen used really well. Get that experience, because these tech companies have got great working relationships now.
yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point. For the virtual platforms anyway, for instance, like I'm using Feedloop again, but Feedloop integrates well with Slido, right? Or
Mm,
integrates well with Zoom or GoToMeetings or whatever the case. And so but they also have an open API. So every platform has something that they have utilized or works well. When you when you integrate something like Swoogo, I don't know if you've heard of Swoogo, right?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, that is a whole other technical level when we integrated that with Event Mobi. So it just depends, right? I think most things are doable, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot more work if you are going outside of the box of what they recommend.
Mm. In your experience, are there certain platforms better suited to smaller events, certain better for medium and large size events? Have you found a one platform fits all, option for people?
Not necessarily. I know it's not the answer you want, but not necessarily because every event is so different, right? If we're
Mm,
doing, let's say, we did an event just on Friday night. It was a drag show for Confederation students, but that platform, they wanted interaction, they wanted more just streaming production, and so we utilized StreamYard to YouTube and to Facebook. Whereas
mhm,
other platforms, commerce, e-commerce type of situations where there's gamification, there's, networking, there's groups, they want different functionalities and features, as well as the production. So I haven't found one that's like a necessarily one-stop, shop
mm,
type of situation, but at the end of the day, I have my, let's say, five go-to platforms, right? And I always
yeah.
recommend them. I always say, here are the top five that I know are going to work, regardless of everything else that comes up. And I mentioned Feedloop because I like Feedloop. It's a Canadian company. I'm Canadian, but also because I know the team. I've worked with probably, like I said, 36, 46 events on their platform, and they've always been really successful. So it's, other platforms have almost these little niches, if you will, right? These
Mhm,
little kind of like, for instance, Run the World. I love creating events on there that are like women owned because they're a women owned platform, right? So all my women entrepreneurs, they love that. They eat it up. They're like, yes, let's use that because maybe it's just a 4 hour conference, and those features and benefits suit their needs. At the end of the
mm.
day, I like to make sure that I assess each conference, event, production as it comes in, and then say, I know exactly what platform you need to use because 87, that's a lot of platforms.
Um, is there attention paid to what the attendees may be familiar with? Because I'm curious to know whether or not that's a consideration that is either underappreciated or overlooked in any way. Because depending on the demographic of your audience and the people who are going to be joining your event online, it's okay selecting a platform that you know is going to work and is going to offer loads of functionality and etc. etc. But if that's a change to maybe what the audience are used to using, and that could cause an issue with accessibility there. Are people sometimes better off sticking with what they know from an audience perspective because they don't have to sort of retrain them or guide them through different processes?
That's a great question. I love that. And yes, in certain circumstances, audience, the know-how, what they've used to, I mean, if they're, again, in the middle of the pandemic last year, we had that, we were going to use this platform and they said, well, I prefer to use something like Zoom because Zoom is more widely known. I mean, right? I use widely known. And so we prefer to use Zoom versus WOVA, let's say.
Yeah.
So yes, that has been the circumstance in a few situations, but now what I'm finding, right, Q4, here we are, is people are saying, oh, well, we can utilize any platform because people are now used to going on these different platforms.
There we
They're
go.
used to new technology and they're going to be more open to that. So yes, last year this time 100% we were saying, well, we need more training and we need one-to-one speaker and we need this and we need that, and so let's use something that like Zoom, right? So we had a lot of Zoom events last year.
Mm.
We also did a lot of events on Hopin because Hopin is widely known, right? A lot
Yeah.
of companies and events are happening on Hopin. Today, I can't say the same thing. I think a lot of attendees are used to looking at new platforms, logging in, make sure that firewall is down, and
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
thinking about, right, just utilizing new technology. We do worldwide events, so we have 8 clients in Asia Pacific, Europe, Australia. So right now we're kind of at this this threshold of let's do it, let's just break the barrier and continue on with learning new.
Mm.
But I'll say firewalls are a big thing, especially in the Asia the Asia Pacific world, where it's hard to use new platforms because they're blocked to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had similar, maybe not as extreme circumstances, but certainly there have been instances over here in the UK where, particularly local authorities, local government, during the pandemic, they were really restricted, that their firewalls, their IT services are fiercely protected. And they were really not just careful, but that it was restrictive,
Oh,
really, in what they could and couldn't use to access, video conferencing and things. And, most of them just ended up on Teams.
yeah,
Again, because it was the easy option, because you
exactly.
know people weren't willing to explore either because of time or cost into what you're doing. But going back to the point that you made about people and their familiarity with these types of platforms now, from a user point of view, a lot of them are very similar. They share similarities. A mute button is a mute button, a camera button is a camera button, share screen, raise hand, instant message, private chat, whatever it may be. There are certain features that are ubiquitous now across all of these platforms. And as people have gone into different ones, as you rightly point out, they've become used to using them, the
Right.
basic functionality that they need to interact.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. These are if they're not included, James, it's like, wow, that's interesting and that's weird and we shouldn't be using that. So, like you said, camera, networking, just meeting people one to one. I mean, in some capacity, whether it's, the matchmaking or even the advanced matchmaking with AI. So, 100%. But again, you have to remember, in the moment, attendees, just like in a live setting, are going to be excited. They're going to be, they forgetful. They're going to, oh, I forgot to unmute, or I forgot to turn on the cam, or, I've stepped away. And so, same with a live in setting, oh, I'm excited. I forgot to turn on the mic. So, things are going to happen anyway, with these features and functionalities that could still be a challenge, whatever the case may be, and whatever platform you're using, even if you're familiar with it. I've done my oops too, right? Where, oh, I'm on mute, right? I muted myself because my dog was barking, but then I forgot to unmute. So it's still human nature, and people are still going to do that, even if they're familiar, like you mentioned, with a platform. So, I always say, like, let's give people grace. Let's give people, because we're kind of still in the middle of pandemic anyway, here in Canada.
Yeah.
And I think all over the world. I don't know about Europe right now, but and so functions, going back to functions and features, um, some of them are really coming out with like this new virtual reality and really advanced settings. I don't know if you've heard that, but
Mm.
and those are interesting, and I can't wait to explore those even further. But that's going to also cause, pose more problems and more, I think, technical if we're
Yeah.
getting into the next realm of the features and functionalities of platforms.
Well, I think one of the major benefits to the whole industry, to not just the events industry, but to all industries, because all industries meet at certain points, either internally as a company or collectively as a peer-to-peer network. In a conference, a seminar. Pharma. I look at industries like the pharmaceutical industry, like the electronic consumer electronics, construction. These industries need to meet and they need to collaborate. And I guess if there's one thing that the last 12 months has really shown, it's that there is clearly an exciting marketplace going forward for meeting people in a virtual capacity. They've all seen how effective just speaking to each other down a laptop can be now.
Right.
So imagine when we've got even more sophisticated smartphones in another 5, 6, 10 years time. With internet connections, 5G mobile is even better. When we've got smaller scale AI glasses and headwear wearables that we can actually use to interact with conferences. I think that if anything, the last 12 months has really shown that there's some exciting times ahead.
Oh, I love that. I'm excited for technology in the future. I'm excited for 5G. Sorry to all the other ones who microchip and but I'm excited for that because at the end of the day, we're really going to the next step and we're going to the next level. And the last, like you said, 12 months, 18 months have really pushed us outside of our box, and I can't wait to be pushed outside even more.
Mm. Um, I'm conscious of to time, and we're rattling through loads of stuff today, which is fantastic. The figure has crept to 87 thus far. How quickly does it continue to rise? Are you working on things at the moment where you're using new platforms? How regularly do you come across new platforms?
Yeah, that's a great question. The last, I would say 3 months, we've used maybe three different platforms. So perhaps one per month that we're coming in, and sometimes the client has already, let's say, chosen that platform or picked that platform before they've hired us. So we have
Mm.
this platform now. We need to find somebody that knows how to use it. And whereas every day, I mean, in my inbox is quite disastrous, but every day in my inbox I get new invitations to new platforms, or let's see this new platform, please come and join, do a demo, recommend us. And sometimes I will do those, but at the end of the day, if I'm on an event and I love the platform, I've never used it, I will go and do a demo, or I will go and see if that's a possibility, to be part of our 87 list of platforms that we utilize. So to answer your question, one a month. There hasn't been too many lately that we haven't used.
Sure, yeah. I'd be interested to see how long it takes to get to the magic three-figure 100. Um, and
Oh,
even more interested to know whether or not being on this podcast today helps or hinders you with the amount of emails that you're subsequently going to
oh
get
yes.
from platform companies and tech providers saying, "Hey, would you like to try this?"
Exactly. And you know what? I mean, I'm always open to kind of even just pinning them in my inbox and looking at them a little bit later. But at the end of the day, I'm in no hurry to get to 100. Let's just say that, because I think with the 87 we have used, there are good, like I said, handful that we can, you know, successfully go to and say, here's our clients' events. We have some sort of affiliation, or not affiliation, but a referral program going, which
Mm.
is also beneficial. And we know that there's going to be top-notch customer service because we're always recommending them, and we're always, supporting what they're doing and the new features that are coming out. Again, that's not to say though, James, I'm always willing to explore new tech.
Absolutely. And we should point out as well, before I start sort of wrapping up today's episode with Alecia, that I'm always excited and also sort of slightly nervous when I'm joined by somebody who has rich experience of doing their own podcast. And of course, you are, of course, the host of the Six Figure Event podcast. And it would be rude of me not to give you a bit of an opportunity on our podcast today to tell our own listeners a little bit about your own podcast and how they can find it.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, James. Absolutely. So you can go to Apple, or I think Spotify now. I speak, again, all things events, platforms, how to make money during your events, profitability, attendee experience. Sponsorship is a big thing for us, and understanding what sponsors want for your next virtual or hybrid experience. And sometimes we bring in sponsors to interview them. So I appreciate that little plug.
Not a problem at all. Yeah. Check out six figure event podcast, and it does bring us nicely to the end of today's episode of our own event industry news podcast. We've been joined today by Alecia May, certified event strategist and coach, host of the Six Figure Event podcast, as we've just said, and founder of Eventistry by Alecia, speaking today on the podcast about their experiences of using 87, that's to date, 87 different virtual event platforms. And before we wrap things up fully, Alecia, tell our guests and our listeners how they can get in touch with you, or if they want to find out a little bit more about what you guys do.
Absolutely. So you can head on over to our website, eventistrybyalecia.com, which is right there. And we can also head on over to any social platforms at Eventistry by Alecia. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, and we're on LinkedIn as well. So hope to see you somewhere in my inbox.
There you go, guys. So go and check those guys out. And of course, get in touch with the podcast as well at Event News Blog on Twitter, and all of the socials is our own handle. And if you didn't see those links that have just popped up on screen because you are listening to today's episode of the podcast, don't forget to head over to eventindustrynews.com. You can check out all the latest news, features, supplements, and of course, video versions of all of our podcasts where you can see those links that we've just mentioned. Of course, if you're already watching this, hello to you all, and thanks for tuning in via the website today on eventindustrynews.com. And do go over to your chosen podcast platform and subscribe and listen to all of the previous 250 something episodes of the Event Industry News podcast that we've been doing now for coming up 6 years or something like that, I think. It's been great. It's been great to talk to you today, Alecia. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thanks. It was great.
Do come back on the show again in future, maybe when you break that magic 3-figure number, and tell us about some of the experiences of those final 13 platforms that got you to 100. And for now, it brings us nicely to the end of today's episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in to the Event Industry News podcast, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye to you all.